War. That's the Battle of Watercolor Put-in-Bay. Battle of Put-in-Bay, or Lake Erie. Northern Federalists voted against it. And that was the region that was most affected by the commercial war and impressment and all that. And so, these are the three reasons why the United States did it. Neutrality rights, and that's the whole thing about Bacon's Bill number 2, remember that. And security along the frontier, and land. They're land hungry. They tried to get Canada back in 1775, and they thought they could do it again. But security along the frontier, that means basically, if you look at her just really quick around this region right here, that means destroy the American Indian threat to the United States moving here. That's what it means. Tippecanoe had just happened. The American Indian, the threat to the expansion of the United States is done. The American Indians are going to be destroyed by the United States. So, these are the three big reasons. And a couple things we need to know. First off, Madison did not want the war, but it was promptly dubbed mockingly as Mr. Madison's War. Because he didn't want it, but he's the president who asked for the declaration, and the war went very badly. And no Federalist support at all. New England actually talked secession. New England talked about leaving the Union, and Britain actually tried to encourage them. It almost happened. Next. Don't have to write down the numbers. I just put down the military, saying the military is totally unprepared. And I put down these numbers, don't write them down, but just to give you an idea how the U.S. only had an army of 6,700 men. And to give you an idea of the size of the European armies, France is going to invade Russia at the same exact time with an army of almost 900,000. The U.S. would eventually get militia up to 35,000, so a little bit over 28,000 total militia, but totally unprepared. The Navy, the U.S. had only 16 ships in the Navy and only 7 could float.
Wait,
the British had over 1,000 ships, including 200 battleships or ships of the line. The U.S. was totally unprepared, and we had absolutely no financial system. The Bank of the United States charter had expired. Remember, Republicans were opposed, and they had nothing to replace it. And so the financial system of the country was falling apart just at a time when the U.S. needed money, and the effects of the embargo and other trade issues were lingering. And so with that, should never have fought. But the United States assumption was Canada would just rise up and join the United States. And Britain was involved with fighting France. So the U.S. did almost forgot. Madison would win re-election because of this. You know, they're kind of riding the wave of nationalism because of the war. But more states up in the north voted for the Federalists. And if you see it called fusion, that's a fusion of anti-war Republicans and Federalists. The New York militia did not join in the fighting. There's going to be one battle called Lundy's Lane, where the U.S. Army and militia lost a battle where the New York militia sat a mile away on a hill watching the U.S. get defeated because the governor of New York was opposed to the war. That should give you an idea how divided the country was. And so with that, the U.S. had a three-pronged attack. Invade Canada. Invade Canada at Lake Champlain, Niagara, and Detroit. And do you want to guess how it went? Disaster, disaster, complete and total humiliation. In fact, General Hall at Detroit surrendered his 3,000-man army to less than 1,000 British soldiers and the remnants of Tecumseh without firing a shot. He fell for the old ruse, where he was in Fort Detroit, a pretty good fort, and the British were about a mile away. And there were about 500 British and about 400 of the rest of Tecumseh's Confederacy. And Hall is watching this. There's a clearing and forest on either side. And what the British did is they lined up in a line, a column of 2, followed by Tecumseh's 400 men, and they marched out of the forest into sight, through the clearing, and then out of sight again behind trees. And then what did the British do once they got to the trees? They ran around and did it again. Ran around, did it again. And Hall thought he was outnumbered 5-1 to surrender. So that gives you an idea how bad things were. Hull is kind of a fossil from the Revolutionary War. There's a couple battles I could talk about. This battle should this map should clear everything up, right? But pretty much you got it. Happy? Everyone happy? All right, so let's just do this one real fast. The Battle of the Thames. And the Battle of the Thames would be one American victory. I know it looks like Thames, but it's copied after the British. They named it the Thames. It's right about here. And what happened was Harrison, remember Harrison from Tippecanoe? He crossed over, more than anything else, just a raid to get the same British forces that took the surrender of Hull. And the British actually fled the battlefield and left Tecumseh and the remnants of the Confederacy fight a battle where they're outnumbered nearly 4-1. And it was a close run deal, but finally Tecumseh's men were routed, and Tecumseh would be killed. This is a lithograph, and I'll talk more about these later on. No one knows how he died. Almost certainly somebody spirited away the body and buried it. But once the battle's over, and this euphoria of winning, defeating Tecumseh, remember, they just terrified of Tecumseh and so much respected him, and now he's gone. It's almost like, yes, now we can do anything we want. And they grabbed a body of somebody they had killed, and they carried it around, this dead body, and literally ripped the body apart, and were carrying the head around of this defeated foe. And what did they start calling? The citizens of the U.S. start calling themselves after Tippecanoe. And that fits in with that same attitude. It went from all of a sudden somebody who was a respected foe, and now we want to justify taking their land and destroying them. How do you do that? You treat them less than human. Fits right in. That is the epitome of racism. Just like when I showed you the picture, you mentioned that earlier, how they made Tecumseh look European. That same thing, that they ripped apart his body because they're not really human, we can do anything we want. Somebody got the back. Police claimed he did. Some militiaman brought it back, and he claimed that he skinned Tecumseh's back, tanned the skin, and made little leather strips from it. So very thin, skin is thin, but not like cowhide. And made this thin leather out of it. And soon there'd be thousands of these sold. I don't even think about where they came from, other animals I like to think, but soon all over the old Northwest, a certain business would buy these, then would advertise that to get their service, they will use Tecumseh leather straps well into the 20th century. Anybody know what business uses leather straps? Very thin leather. Barbers. Before they shave, they have that straight razor, and to get a fine edge, they go like this on a leather strap. And so they said they were doing that on a Tecumseh leather strap. And that's the same little bit of kind of racism, how that is, and how we can do that to his back. Well into the 20th century. I've seen one of these, it looks, now it just has this crinkly thing. Who knows where it came from. But that's the Battle of the Thames. 1814, the British, Napoleon is defeated. And the British now can finally knock the United States down. They were not thinking about conquering, but they thought maybe we could break off New England and get New Orleans. So they had a four-pronged plan. Strengthen their blockade. The blockade was already pretty effective, but now they have ships fresh from defeating France. And Britain wanted this over. So don't think in terms of an invasion. Next, attack down Lake Champlain. Remember how General Burgoyne did that Saratoga back in 1777? Same thing. Next, go up the Chesapeake and do a raid on Washington, D.C. American forces did a raid on the Canadian colonial capital at York in Toronto today and burnt down the Parliament. Let's do a raid. And lastly, and here's the biggie, New Orleans. And so that was the plan. And I don't have time to go through the details of the battle, but the Battle of Lake Champlain, a small little makeshift American fleet, another one of these lithographs, defeated an equivalent-sized British fleet. Totally surprising. The British completely screwed up. But Lake Macdonald, I'll tell you one thing they did. You kind of see it here. They lined up their ships. This is the battle line. Does that kind of look like a battle line? or paramecium. And the ship, that's McDonald. It's MAC, but this lithograph has it with M apostrophe. So, but it's MacDonald. He had his ships line up, and each of them had anywhere from 14 to 20 guns. That means, let's say they had 16 guns, 8 on each side. And it would take anywhere from 2 to 10 minutes to load the cannon. So you fire once, then you have to load. But what he did is, to double the firepower, is he had each ship put out an anchor here and here. And in the strong channel with relatively shallow Lake Champlain, the anchors went down. But just imagine having a ship here. This anchor goes down. They lock this chain, but let this chain go free. What does the boat do with a strong channel? It begins to turn. So you would turn it towards like this side, then lock the chain. When the British got in range, all the guns on this side would fire, then what would all the boats do in unison? They'd pull in that chain, the boat would turn, and they could fire again. So while the British were still reloading, they doubled their firepower. And then the other side reloads, then they turn back, then they can fire. Pretty clever, isn't it? Not that it was a new idea, but it's very hard to do, and that's what it worked there. Who knows? If the British could have won here, New England seriously talked secession. And it very well could have happened. Next, the Chesapeake Campaign. And this is a map showing Chesapeake Bay. Here's the Potomac, Washington, D.C., and the new growing harbor town of Baltimore. So I'm talking about this area right here. It's a raid. And the British using crack troops fighting the French. 4,000 crack troops under a very good general by the name of Ross. Their plan was, here's the Chesapeake, fake up the Potomac with the Navy, then land the troops and march overland to D.C. There's no U.S. trained troops there at all. The few American troops with experience are here, here, and here. And there were no roads yet, so they could never get there. All they had was 6,000 or 7,000 completely untrained militia. What do militia always do? But at a place called Bladensburg, right here, there was a stone fence. And what they did is they put the militia behind the stone fence about this high. Imagine a stone fence, got a little bit of protection, you can stand up and fire. Remember Bunker Hill they didn't run? And that's what they thought. In fact, the United States was so confident that President Madison, Secretary of State Monroe, other people came down to watch the fight, to watch the fun. And so they were on a hill watching the battle between Bladensburg and Washington, D.C. And when Ross's British soldiers came, the British were outnumbered by 2,000 men, but they're really crack troops. They got close to about 50 paces, fired once, and started marching with fixed bayonets toward the Americans. So you can imagine what the militia did behind the fence. Pretty protected. Carefully took aim, and then there it went. Right? All of them, all nearly 7,000 turned and ran at the same time. Just this whole wave, they threw down their muskets and ran. The British started chasing them, and they couldn't catch them. That's why they call it the Bladensburg Races. All the way through Washington, D.C., which was 10 miles away, Madison had to spur his horse and barely made it back to the executive mansion, called the White House now, and got a few papers and a few things out. In his hurry, he forgot his wife, who was upstairs getting something. So Dolly Madison, the story is, probably not this fast, but as she was leaving the back door, the British were coming in the front door. And you can go to the plaque, or you go to the spot, there's a little plaque there saying where Madison watched the British forces enter the executive mansion. And the British fired a couple shots at the front door. If you go there today, in the column, right in front of the front door of the White House, there are still musket balls in holes in the column. You can only see them when you come out, and there they are, right there, kind of on the side. Don't try to take a picture of them. Just telling you right now, don't do that. I walked out. This is the first time I was there. This is 1996. And I'm walking out. Oh, there's the hole. And you're not supposed to take a picture inside the White House. But I'm out the front door, right? And so I pulled up my camera just like this, and I didn't see anybody. There's no, and like literally, like from here to here, there's a guy right here. It took like half a second. He's like, You want me to take that camera? No! So that's my story of seeing the bullet hole. God, I guess they're still there. Has anyone taken a tour of the White House? Has anyone been to Washington, D.C.? Have you been to Ekalaka, Montana? Gotcha. All right, so, no, if you get a chance, take a tour of the White House. You got to set it up and go through the basement. It's really neat. When I was there, President Clinton was upstairs. And supposedly, he was there when I was there. The second time I was there was President Bush. And I think he was out of country. But that's all my story. So they ran out, and then there's another plaque where Madison saw them entering the Capitol. And you can imagine what they did when they got to the Capitol and the Executive Mansion and all the other buildings. They broke everything, looted it, and then burnt it down. And just imagine if you had the free reign to go into a building and break everything. Let's be honest. That'd be kind of fun, wouldn't it? Just go, let's go break stuff. And so here's a painting of them burning down the Executive Mansion. I like this one. This actually, this wood carving, but they show them all with the loot they stole as they're leaving. They burnt it down, burnt down the rotunda. In the House chambers, General Ross, the British commander, was at the Speaker of the House's podium, and he was trying to get their attention. The men are just ripping things apart, taking their bayonet and chopping things up, and he starts beating his pistol. They don't pay attention. Finally, he shoots the pistol in the air. The men kind of look at him, and he goes, "Men, this is a parliament, so we'll have a vote. Shall we burn it?" Like, ah! So they burned down the Capitol. You go there today, and they built it right on the same foundation. There are also scorch marks in the foundation of the United States Capitol today from when they burnt it down. And this is a picture, this is pre-photography. So the whole inside was burnt down, and then the rest of it's gutted. The only thing that saved the whole building from being burnt down was a big thunderstorm came with a lot of rain that morning. Put out some of the fires. And they're going to spend the next few years rebuilding it. And so most of this was taken down, but some of it was still used on the current. And then eventually it became known as the White House and the Capitol right there. Then they went up to Baltimore. Same deal. They were going to go to Baltimore and attack overland and do like a fake attack here in Baltimore Harbor. There were a couple of unfinished forts, most famously Fort McHenry. And the plan was to use mortar boats and rocket boats to, it's called reducing the fort, which means you knock out the fort's defenses and make it surrender. And by the way, how does a fort say they're surrendering? What do? They take down their flag. And technically, you can put up a white flag, but the big thing is they take down their flag. That's like you surrender. Does that make sense? And do you know what a mortar is? What's a mortar?
Something that's like this, that shoots up in the air.
It comes down?
Yeah. It's a ball.
Yeah, you're right. And yeah,
Oh, I was just gonna say like a long range.
huh?
A long range.
It's not that long a range because actually, even though it is kind of like a cannon, but the idea is this is Fort McHenry looks like today, and these ramparts here are really thick. So a gun that fires it like this would just go into those walls. But a mortar shoots really high and plunges down where it's less defended. And back then the mortars looked not a heck of a lot different than that fake cauldron over there, like a big pot. And you fire these big iron balls. Sometimes they'd be drilled out, filled up with gunpowder. Now, gunpowder does not really explode, it ignites, but still. And they also had a fuse. And they were hoping that the fuse would ignite when it was fired, so you could see it. And gunpowder doesn't propel the shell very fast. So you can see this like image going through it in like this little light at night. I guess it was pretty spectacular and terrifying if you're on the other end. And they hoped that the fuse would go out right when it hit the enemy's fort. Sometimes they would hit it and then burn and then be done. Sometimes they explode in the air. Sometimes they'd explode right in the mortar. Bad for the crew morale. And so they also had rockets. Now these rockets, do you know what a bottle rocket was? Is, I don't think they. Think about it, like a long pole, and it's not a heck of a lot different than a long pole with a barrel of gunpowder on it. And the idea was they would put these in they get a couple pieces of wood, make like a wedge, and just kind of shoot it up in the air. And it goes up in the air, and it might hit something, explode in the air. The big thing about the rockets, scary and intimidating looking, especially at night. And so that's what they did, a night attack with mortars and rockets. And this is a pretty stylized version of it. You can see that's supposed to be the fuses. But think about it at night, that must have been pretty spectacular. And so, right before the attack, in fact, earlier the day before on the 13th, Francis Scott Key rode out to the Tonnant. And the Tonnant was the flagship of Admiral Cochrane. He went to the release a friend of his, Dr. Bennis, and he'd been captured in the Washington, and we're not going to go into the details of it. And since he was on the Tonnant right when the shelling began, they wouldn't let him off. And so he witnessed it. And so this is trying to show how spectacular these rockets taking off must have been. The big thing is just loud, and these fuses going off like a big fireworks show. Another pretty stylized picture of it. And the thing about that was, the last thing he saw, Fort McHenry, that dark night, was this is the flag. This massive flag. Look how big it is. Do you see the building behind it? That's 3 stories. Look how big the God is compared to it. And it's also another about maybe a bit bigger, but they cut off pieces, including a star for souvenirs after the battle. So people just cut off a piece and kept it. The next morning, he assumed, because of the bombardment was so spectacular, that the flag would be down, the fort surrendered. And yet the flag was still up. The fort was unfinished, but the bombardment was really inaccurate. McHenry survived. And because they couldn't reduce the forts, they pulled back and didn't burn down Baltimore. The British got what they wanted. But inspired by what he saw and a poem he wrote 9 years earlier, where he mentioned that the flag that's a Star-Spangled Banner, he would write the poem, a 4-stanza poem called The Defense of Fort McHenry. But everybody says it's the Star-Spangled Banner. That's what the flag looks like today. If you go to the Smithsonian Museum of American History, it is hanging right there. The first time I was there, this is also 22 years ago, it was the flag before they reconditioned it. I got there a month before they reconditioned it, and it was basically gray. And they took it down, it went over a decade, and thread by thread, they reconditioned that. I have no idea how you recondition a piece of thread, but they did it. And now it is really cool. If you've been there, it is wow, isn't it? And that gives you an idea how much longer it was before they cut off the pieces. And it's just sad, but so they have the image of it behind, but it's not the real star. It's really cool. I like the Smithsonian, even though it's kind of overwhelming. Now, he had a song in his head, but before we get to the song, this would become one of the many songs that was popular to sing. No, it was not the National Anthem. We didn't have one until the 19th century, but people only know the first stanza. And it's a good fighting song, isn't it? Rockets' red glare, what I just told you about. The bombs, those are the mortar shells. The ramparts of Fort McHenry. It's a fighting song. Not quite as much of a fighting song as in the French National Anthem, the Marseillaise, because that literally has blood of your enemies running in the streets. That's a fighting song, but this is pretty close. And that's a very stylized painting of it. And so it all has these references to battle. And the thing was, it was sometimes sung in the Civil War, but I got to tell you 2 little stories of this very quickly. First off, nobody knows the other 3 verses, right? I mean, have you even looked at them, the other 3 stanzas? A few of you have. And the British... I just said Francis Scott Key.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, the 3rd verse has a very specific reference to what the British were doing. The British were actively recruiting slaves like they did in the Revolutionary War, giving them their freedom to fight against the United States. And Key, a slaveholder, was very disturbed by this, and these 2 lines are about that. Basically, we're going to kill these runaway slaves, these hirelings. And shows a very complex history of the United States, a very pro-slavery song. And one thing about those slaves that fought for their freedom, but obviously they could not go back to the United States, 99.9% of them were born in the United States or American colonies. Where could they go? So Britain settled them in their colony of Jamaica as free people in Jamaica, and they started a community, and to this day, this picture I'm going to show you, these two pictures are from 5 years ago. They called them the Americans. They're still called the Americans. I want to say Americans, but Americans. And these were the former slaves. And key references them. So, yes, the national anthem has a very complex history. And that's from 5 years ago. That's where some of the original Americans. So these are former slaves. Fort McHenry would be used as a prison during the Civil War. And Francis Scott Key's great-grandson was held there for being a Confederate. Once again, like I said, we have a complex history. One thing I should add, too. Has anyone ever tried to seriously sing the national anthem? I don't mean kind of mouth the words, but sing it and sing it well. It's really easy to sing, isn't it? It's that 2-octave rise in the middle. That's so easy for most people to do. I'm kidding. It's really hard to sing well. And human voices don't go low and they go 2 octaves like that. There's very few people who do that well. There's a reason for that. He had a song in his head that was a song called To Anacreon in Heaven. It's from the Anacreon Society. The Anacreon Society was in fact, it mentions here about the myrtle of Venus and Bacchus's wine. It's a drinking society. It's a drinking song. And it's meant to be sung by people who are drunk, sitting around a piano, and they're singing along, and all of a sudden they scream. And that's why it's so hard to sing. And so the national anthem of the United States in 1916, Wilson by executive order, President Wilson would say it's a national anthem, but that didn't mean anything yet. In 31, the law would be, and that would become the national anthem. My Country 'Tis of Thee was actually more popular. The problem with My Country 'Tis of Thee, easier song to sing, in some ways a better song, but the music for that comes from another song. Does anyone know? Do you remember the song My Country 'Tis of Thee? Sweet Land of Liberty. Anyone know the song? Who? Yeah. Yeah. It's God Save, well, then it was King, but now it's God Save the Queen. It's the British national anthem. So, we just stole another British song. So, with that, the British fled Baltimore. Washington, D.C. would be burned, but fortunately for the United States and Britain, this war made no sense, especially after France was gone. Nobody wanted this war. While the country or the capital is being burned, they're already negotiating, but you notice it's not in Paris. You getting this down? So you don't have New Orleans, Battle of Lake Champlain. What I just said about Francis Scott Key.
Yeah, how he.
Let's get things down, okay? And so with that, the Treaty of Ghent. You notice I did not say Paris. I did not say Paris. The Treaty of Ghent would be done what is now present-day Belgium. The reason why not Paris is because Napoleon had just surrendered, and they didn't want to do it there. And today it's in present-day Belgium. It's a really a very pretty town, very pretty town that survived World War II without being destroyed. And this treaty was a status quo antebellum treaty. Remember those I mentioned before? Status quo means to go the way it was before the war. To go the way it was before the war. Meaning, this war meant nothing. The war had no real purpose. It was looking back at it, both sides could not really say why they fought. The United States certainly did not win, but at least we could argue we did not lose. And it was signed on December 24th, 1814. Christmas holiday was not an important holiday yet for virtually anybody. Secular or not secular. Industrial Revolution will change that. And so, the Hartford Convention will happen at almost the same time. And this is where the Federalists nearly broke out. Nearly broke away from the Union. Federalists met in Newfoundland. They went up to Newfoundland, to New England, and they talked nullification. Remember the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions? or secession. They talked about leaving the Union. Notice how we spelled secession. It's not success, it's secession. And fortunately, they never nullified the war or tried to leave the Union over the war before the Treaty of Ghent was signed. Ironically, the war that almost everybody would have admitted it was a mistake, they, the Federalists, were right it was a mistake, yet they looked anti-patriotic. And the Federalist Party would die within 5 years. There'd be no Federalist Party left. So, New England Federalists try to nullify, and this is a big deal because the South would use the same argument. Hey, the North is acting unconstitutional. This cartoon is supposed to show the Federalists, the Hartford Convention ballots, so Federalists against Republicans, Lady Columbia, Liberty. And who is that? Satan. Beelzebub. Yes, Satan. Yeah.
Who are the leaders of the Federalists at this time? Because they're kind of all really older now.
Yeah, they are pretty much all. A couple of Clintons. There's two, Pickering, Timothy Pickering, Thomas Pickering.
Okay.
But they're basically, you're pretty much right. And one more thing really quick. Ironically, remember New Orleans? The British were going to attack all together at the end of summer, but they couldn't go to New Orleans at the end of summer and fall because what season is it? Hurricane. So they didn't go until December when they left Jamaica to go invade New Orleans. When the first British soldiers began landing at near New Orleans, the treaty had already been signed. The biggest battle of the War of 1812 was going to happen 2 weeks after the war. So we have very quickly finished that. We'll play a song. Yeah. Maybe, but the thing about it is that Democrats and Republicans in the last couple of years, they've kind of rigged the political system to make sure that only Democrats and Republicans are on the ballot. And so I think it's really hard to see a third party. Unless we get some kind of proportional representation, there's always going to be two parties in just the way the system is. Doesn't mean that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party will change. Yeah, it's already what do you do? Give me time when you got.
Okay, I can do it.
Okay, things I can't do it today because I have to do it for chiropractor. Tomorrow, 7:30 is for time.
Tomorrow? We have no idea.
Preacher's Court right here.
I applied for it.
And we do make favor and jump on this. We're gonna there'll be a little more of a reading assignment, but then yes, come here.
Okay. We're actually
Can
doing
you
the
just say library or residence?
Library.
The library, what?
I don't want to talk about libraries today.
Oh my gosh.
Huh? We're doing conspiracy theories special topics.
Oh my
Yeah, I mean, all this stuff is fun, but you know, like one thing about American history, you know, I mean, the great parts or bad parts, we have to go through everything. Special topics we can do. I picked some, but they picked the other topics. You got little bits wrong here and there. Like you never explain how the compromise happened, where it was.
Are we going to the library?
Yeah. Shay's Rebellion, a little bit more about the death and the assault. I'm serious on that. Sometimes I see something like, oh yeah, and this is
Yeah, that's
your
the-
philosophy.
Okay, so rewrite that one.
I'll tell you what, if you come in tomorrow at lunch, it'll take you 10 minutes.
Okay.
Maybe tomorrow you can come like, I should be around. If you come 10 minutes for the bell ring, I'll let you for the beginning of it. Or would you rather come right? Either way, come in, I'll let you write that one.
Thank you.
But remind me about that one because I looked at that one. I think I can give you one or two, another point for that one.
Okay.
You're alive!
Yeah.
Sorry, I put your topics down and they all went really fast. That's what we're here.
Doesn't matter. But I won't be here tomorrow either.
Where are you gonna be?
I got surgery.
Huh?
I got surgery.
Oh, what do you have to do?
Just like a kind of growth at the base of my back.
Get it done now. It's gonna be, they have to knock you out, or?
Yeah.
Oh, so it won't be a local?
Mhm.
Any kind of nerve issue with that, or is it just
No.
gonna be, okay?
I just have to.
Okay, when it's right there, though, they can't really give you a local.
They said it's hard to numb because it said like halfway through the procedure you could get feeling back.
Yeah, you wanna be knocked out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that. Let me see where I set. You're just gonna have to wait for me. I set down the stuff and then I move things around and yell at Steve. My day never ends. I'm telling you what, we could do that surgery right here in class.
Yeah.
And I'm just throwing this out here, but I could do that. You wouldn't have to know me. I have a hammer.
Okay.
I understand completely. Will you be back?
I'll probably be back Thursday.
Oh, that's good. A little sore, but
yeah.
I'll let you take it upstairs and we'll go from there.